Thank you, Pure Storage and Lacework, for the great fireside chat. So our next panel discussion is focused on the complete ransomware solution, managing, detecting, and responding. Cybercriminals are more sophisticated than ever. Ransomware attacks continue to rise. But what's the right solution? On the panel today are the top security vendors who play a critical role to prevent, detect, and respond to the latest ransomware threats within this new and distributed world. In addition, we'll uncover ways to help you manage the process, reduce your risk, and orchestrate the right response after a breach or attack. I'm honored to introduce the panelists who will be joining the discussion today. Evan Santorina is a senior pre-sales system engineer with Arctic Wolf, with over 10 years of experience. Evan has worked with numerous organizations to improve their security posture. Evan has focused in the areas of identity and data governance, next-gen antivirus, and most recently comes from a world of logs, commonly known as the SIM space. Evan has a wide range of war stories he has collected from his customers over the years, and he uses these as talking points to further educate organizations on best practices for maturing their cybersecurity program. Evan, thank you very much for joining.
Thanks, Peter.
David Sales is a global field CTO for Rubrik, working with enterprise customers and global partners on leveraging the Rubrik Cloud Data Management Platform to drive their digital transformations forward. As an experienced technology executive with over 20 years in the industry, he has served as the Vice President of Data Classification for HighTrust, a co-founder and CTO of Data Gravity, and co-leads the Tampa VMware Users Group in his home state of Florida. David, thank you very much for joining.
Thanks for having us.
Gavin Vandervelt from ServiceNow SecOps business unit, who supports over half of North America, is here joining us today. Gavin has 13 years of various experience, including working with Varonis, McAfee, Intel, and now ServiceNow. Gavin, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
And last but not least, Stephen Fretham is the Director of Sales Enablement for Varonis. He has worked in the IT and security industry since 2000. He's based out of the Twin Cities, and Stephen has spent time at some of the largest organizations, including Target, US Bank, Honeywell, and United Health Group. In his current role at Varonis, Stephen works with organizations around the US, helping them protect their data from insider threats and cyber attacks. Stephen, thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Well, gentlemen, I'm looking forward to the discussion. I'd like to jump right in. Not an easy question, but one I'm sure the audience would love to hear your perspective on. Obviously, we have 3 panels going today. However, this one seems to be the most riskiest. Why was it that you chose to participate in a ransomware panel? Stephen, would you like to open it up?
Well, I think I'll start with by saying, there's a couple of us who do speaking and evangelist roles here at Varonis, and I don't want to say I drew the short straw because I actually would enjoy talking about ransomware, but when one guy gets to drive supercars and I get to come talk about ransomware, that's kind of how it goes for me typically. But in a more serious answer with that, I think, one of the things about ransomware, I don't consider this a risky conversation to have at all. It's still a very prevalent problem that many customers of ours as well as others face, and that it's something that it continues to evolve and change. And everybody here, I think, on this panel is going to have good answers and techniques and processes that people should be adopting in order to be able to stop ransomware. So I, for one, am really excited about it.
Thank you, and I appreciate it. And, it's interesting. You brought up techniques, processes. I know David is here from Rubrik. David, I'd love to get your perspective, obviously coming from your space.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, being in the resiliency space, we sell the insurance that's the last line of defense for customers that you have to deal with and have a plan for if everything else has failed them. And, ransomware today is the #1 topic in the boardroom. I mean, it's not in the security space anymore. It's hitting everybody from the board of directors to the financial officers all the way down. So, the fact that it's got that kind of attention and it's that prevalent in the industry is a top concern for the business. It's something that's timely to talk about. So, yeah, it's a risk, but like any risk can be managed. So, I'm happy to have the conversation here today.
Thank you, David. And as you mentioned, there is no silver bullet when it comes to ransomware. It's a risk, but if you manage it properly, it can be controlled. I would be very interested, Kevin, from your perspective, coming from Arctic Wolf. I'm understanding that you really are a full service outsourced MDR player. How do you view ransomware, and why did you choose this panel?
Yeah, and I think we're all in the same boat here, and we're going to agree that the velocity of ransomware that we're seeing today in the news versus stuff we're even not uncovering and hearing about is growing exponentially, right? And you take the idea of work from home and what we're dealing with today, again, expanding on that. Now there's a point where you can't really keep up, especially in the small and mid-sized organizations. So it really comes down to education. It's still a real problem. In fact, I was reading an article that ransomware, it's a business, all right? There's pyramid schemes for it, and there's folks, that are, they want to go out there, they want to exploit the small and medium-sized organizations. So for me, from an article perspective, I think it's a really good panel for folks to hear. If you're dealing with post ransomware or ransomware paranoia, it's an opportunity for folks to hear what we do from an article perspective, but also to hear how they can layer your approach with some of the other solutions and vendors on this call today.
Thanks, Kevin. And it's interesting and scary to think of it as a business, but that truly is what it is. There's call centers and processes set up like any natural business that just deal with ransomware. So looking forward to continuing the discussion to help our customers understand how to manage this risk. Stephen, I'd like to stay with you. I appreciate you answering the first question. The next question I have for you is, what are you doing to help your customers prepare for ransomware attacks?
Thanks. That's a really good question. So, one of the things that Varonis is pretty well known for is how we're doing risk assessments, and historically for us, that's been focused on data. What we're seeing in on-premise file shares, SharePoint, as well as Office 365 and other repositories like that. And recently we've done a big shift now, and this was a push from our customers and is now something that we're offering for our prospects as well, where we're actually going in and doing assessment, where we look to see what would happen if you have a ransomware attack in your environment. What is the scope of the data that would potentially be infected, depending on which account or how that ransomware attack does get in? What would be the scope of that level of attack? And that's something we've been doing across the board for anyone who comes and engages with us, and of course working through our CDI as well, where we'll actually tell you exactly what the impact of a ransomware attack might be with some of the most common forms that are out there, as well as some of the ones that we might even not know about yet when it comes to the data that they'll impact.
That's a great point. There's a lot of different types of assessments out there, and I think the more proactive you can be in terms of stress testing your environment, the better. We here at CDI, we also leverage assessments, particularly focused around breach attack simulations, where we can really stress test those controls, leveraging numerous ransomware attacks to see how the controls would respond. So it's not just a hypothetical, it's more of a proactive approach. So definitely appreciate that. Thank you, Stephen. And Kevin, I'd love to get your perspective on that same question and how what you're doing at ServiceNow to help prepare customers around ransomware.
Yeah, so it's all about the response piece here at ServiceNow. So it's the ability to ingest the data points and the threat intelligence fields that we're able to consume to help organizations better respond to those threats that are populating or crawling across their network, so to speak. So ransomware has never been more prevalent than it is today. It's changed in sophistication and techniques. Organizations are still falling, susceptible to these types of email campaigns and targeted activities. And really, it's you can't stick your head in the sand and think that it's going to go away. So only a proactive approach by addressing it on calls like today and educating consumers and end users about the pitfalls that lay ahead and how to potentially avoid them. I think that's key to what we're trying to do and accomplish here in the cybersecurity space, right? Education is paramount. Data is the new currency, and if we're not protecting that, then what are we doing? Ransomware and the ability to respond effectively to ransomware is really where ServiceNow through CDI is going to shine. So,
thank you. I'd like to actually move over to David again over at Rubric. So we did talk about, ransomware being just a cost of doing business. And unfortunately, that's a reality. However, is there something that companies can confidently do to protect themselves against, ransomware in the future?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think we have this real understanding that ransomware is never going to be preventable, right? It's how fast can you detect it and how fast can you respond and mitigate the event. And so, from a customer's perspective, and we've got customers that, the war gaming is a great exercise because it helps them identify where the deficiencies are, but they also have to think about the downstream dependencies and how they're going to recover, right? That exercise is going to help them understand that. So, I mean, from a perspective of protection, it's like anything else in security. It's defense in depth. They have to have the endpoint detection response. They got to have up-to-date antivirus, firewalls, all that kind of stuff. But then, if you still have an event, you have to be able to have confidence that you're going to have a resiliency layer to allow you to get back. And obviously, at Rubric, we provide a resiliency layer platform that's immutable, that's going to be that guaranteed copy to help you get back. And we have technologies we built on top of that to really kind of help accelerate that life cycle. Obviously, we integrate with our friends at ServiceNow, and we integrate and kick off, SIR response workflows, things along those lines. So, the customer, yes, you have to have the confidence that they have a recovery plan, but it's not going to give them the confidence that it's never going to happen. It would be a fallacy to say that you can be foolproof.
That's a great point. I think resiliency is a hot topic, and ensuring understanding that you're going to get breached. It's not a matter of if, it's when, and having that plan in place. And Kevin, I noticed you were nodding your head over there. What are your thoughts?
Same exact talk track, right? It's the acceptance of building that into your security strategy that it's going to happen, right? So when it does, what are the layers implemented that prevent the attack surface, right? And as long as you work that, as Dave mentioned, the downstream effect into your security posture, you're going to minimize the surface of the attack, and make sure that moving forward, you're still strengthening the security posture overall.
Thank you, Kevin. Sticking with you, Kevin, can an organization ever be fully 100% ransomware proof? I mean, I think we've answered that question, but love to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, I wish it was an easier answer, Peter, but I think we all, nod our heads in agreement that the short answer is no. And that's the messaging that we're here to convey, is that you can't ever be ransomware proof. And more importantly, it's kind of just like that call to action to your security strategy that accounts for things like ransomware, exactly like what I said. So it's a call to action to build out that mature layered approach, run books, playbooks, minimizing the attack surface, right? All the things we've mentioned earlier. And then more importantly, you have that type of guided remediation plan to recover as quickly as possible. So I'm big on statistics, and I do a lot of reading on white papers. And one of the ones that article was published is there was an increase of 400% in ransomware attacks among small, mid-sized enterprise customers. And it's kind of obvious as to why. Enterprise, large enterprise, you assume that there's controls in place. You hope, right? But at the SMB, the mid-sized layer, they're easier targets. They're less mature. They lack the manpower. They lack the expertise. And like you deal with something called alert fatigue, right? You have to deal with alert fatigue plus your day-to-day management of just keeping the lights on. And so you can't necessarily identify a ransomware attack as quickly as you want, because I think David mentioned it, or I think Peter mentioned it. Speed is the name of the game when it comes to ransomware. So it's detection and response. So as we move through it from an article perspective, we can talk all day about the best practices, right? So it's things like backup and restore, right? Your daily incrementals, make sure your recoveries work. Segmentation, right? Identify your crown jewels, separate them out, make sure they're not as easily accessible. Training, right? I have another white paper that I pulled up in doing some reading from infection, from detonation to infection is 3 seconds on an average user cycle, right? They click a button, C2 communication pulls down into ransomware. And then updating your signatures and your definitions, right? If you're using an endpoint solution, patch your systems, keep an eye on your vulnerabilities. And lastly, but certainly not least, is monitor your stuff, right? And so this is where the article of Concierge Security Team plays a huge role, right? It's a 24/7 SOC that comes to augment your organization's staff, where They might not necessarily have those off-hours monitoring solutions, or they lack manpower, the expertise like you mentioned earlier. So an example of how Arctic Wolf would handle a ransomware attack, right? So if an attacker delivers ransomware, alerts, the event log data, hopefully your AV, hopefully your endpoint protection platform kind of came in and detected that early on in the way of like file scanning, heuristics, sandboxing, and your article of concierge security team member will hopefully identify that and will detect it based on cross correlation of what they've done. If it makes it past the AV and the endpoint, which hopefully it doesn't, then we'll see things like your command and control traffic from the infected endpoint. And we'll analyze this, look at this from the event logs, from the on-premise sensor. Right? We'll do tons of correlation, web traffic, TNS queries, and we'll know for certain at this point if the endpoint's been compromised. And once it's been identified, evaluated, IOCs, the concierge security team identifies you guys to let you know, hey, this is what we're going to do from an incident response perspective. There also is the ability to do that type of host-based isolation or containment on the endpoint. So all that's done, you're doing the investigations. What next, right? There's a security review. You need to know root cause. How did it happen? What was touched? Now are we doing a remediation plan? So, Arctic Wolf as an organization, we have tons of war stories, right? Credit unions, large manufacturers on the auto side, but really the average time when we look at this from identification, reaction, and response, 20 minutes, right? And so again, it comes down to the preparation, the readiness, plan B, plan C, plan D. That's what we're pretty good at. So that's my spiel.
I appreciate that.
I might add on too to what Kevin said. I mean, what we've seen from a Varonis perspective in the past year with our incident response teams, I know that works very closely a lot of times with Arctic Wolf. We're seeing a huge influx of attacks over the last year since COVID came into play and all of us moved to, or many of us moved to remote work, where the attackers were not sleeping. They were out in force and they were doing more and more styles of attacks. And just to really reinforce what he's saying is, you hope that we have defense in depth where you have endpoint detection and response, where you have firewalls and systems in place that detect these things, but they're managing to sneak their way through. When you only look at the SolarWinds example that we just had recently of how, organizations are sneaking their way in through the chain or other ways like that. So having yes, we need to have these perimeter-based solutions in place, but being able to see and being able to decipher and respond decisively, as he said, when something does manage to sneak past those defenses and starts moving around inside your environment, you got to be able to see and know when it happens, ransomware and beyond, certainly with those types of things.
I think I hear the word hope quite often, and you both mentioned it, and I think, to our earlier discussion around stress testing, you've got to start being proactive, right? Customers, there's a lot to think about. There's a lot to manage, and you're never going to get a definitive on anything. But if you have the opportunity to embrace all the intelligence we have over the last couple of years about how these attacks have evolved, and we know there's things like the MITRE ATT&CK matrix and everything that show you, provide guidance. Use that intelligence to stress test your security controls so that hope is not any longer a concern, right? So I appreciate you guys bringing that up. And I want to just continue the discussion. There was a mention around end users versus technology. And Gavin, from your perspective, when we talk about ransomware protection, how much of that do you think has to do with the end user competency? Or is it more around the technology? How would you look at that?
I think organizations do their best, especially in today's day and age, to get a handle around ransomware if they haven't already invested in a large cybersecurity stack to help mitigate ransomware and other threats that hit their environment. They're in the process of maturing that out, or they're relying on MSP providers to augment that piece of their stack until they're ready to either bring it in-house or maybe keep it as is. But when it comes to people versus technology, I think ransomware falls into a little bit of the people bucket. We've all, the 13, 14 years that I've been doing cybersecurity, we're always striving to educate the end user to make better decisions for the organization. But at the end of the day, they're the ones that continue to make the misclicks. So at some point, it's education plus technology. There's got to be something in the middle that meets. There is no silver bullet that's going to stop every single ransomware attack. They're getting more sophisticated. They're figuring out ways in, right? I don't want to blame it all on the users. I think the technology and the organizations that we all represent here on the panel are doing their best to try to get ahead of the ransomware and the other attacks that we're seeing out there. I think we saw, you know, one of the things I think, you know, can you prevent ransomware or can you prevent a breach from happening in the beginning versus you're never going to be able to stop a breach and you have to do something about it. So that's the mindset of George Kurtz at CrowdStrike and Stuart McClure at Cylance, right? Stuart McClure believed that they could stop everything before it actually got to your system, and George Kurtz believed that it was inevitable, that something was going to happen, and it's all about the response. So here at ServiceNow, we represent a security orchestration and response platform. So we too believe that, you know, you're not going to be able to stop ransomware attacks or any other attacks in general 100% of the time, whether that's a lack of technology being in place or end user education. That's just the reality of the situation. So we have to do our best as a marketplace to continue to fight the good fight. And hopefully at some point we start to win and turn that tide. And I think that doesn't happen until we bring a level of automation and orchestration to the cybersecurity community, which is exactly what ServiceNow is trying to do specifically. So we can't scale without some level of orchestration and automation, and we're certainly not going to get out of ransomware, malware, phishing attacks, and all the others if we're constantly just reacting to those threats and not actually proactively going out and trying to stop them and plugging those holes, doing, you know, user attestation reviews, understanding who should have access to what, making sure that user profiles are clean, right? That's nitty-gritty stuff that no one ever really has the time to get to because they're too busy fighting these fires. So you introduce a platform like a SOAR platform, which brings in a level of orchestration, automation, and response, leveraging the partners and the technologies that are on this panel today to actually respond more effectively, quicker, right? Reduce that mean time to remediation and increase that ROI from your security stack. I mean, that's the big problem that ServiceNow is trying to solve in the marketplace with our partnership with the larger SecOps community. So user versus technology, it's somewhere in the middle, but we need to get better, I think, again, in that automation, orchestration, and response side in order to get ahead of that curve because we're obviously not getting ahead of it right now. So that's my take.
Appreciate that, Gavin. And I think it's extremely valid point. SOAR marketplace has grown tremendously, and you've seen some market leaders actually, you know, start to invest in players and pull them out of the market to bring into their portfolio because they realize that orchestration level is imperative. Without it, you know, customers have to continue to deal with so much noise, right? And they just can't get to the pure signals. And you need automation, orchestration to get there. So thank you. And David, you know, I see you nodding over there. What are your thoughts on the discussion on that?
I'm just 100% spot on. I mean, you have to train the human firewall because, you know, it's the weakest link. It's always going to be the weakest link. But, you know, technology's got to be on your side. You know, you have to be able to do some attestation and testing and trusting. I mean, honestly, zero trust, right? Zero trust is the way to go now. No trust but verify doesn't exist anymore. You know, take the zero trust methodology, validate everything, and then put, you know, analytics with machine learning and AI on top of it. I mean, you have to, because the adversaries are doing it already. So you have to fight back. The same way. It's an arms race. It's equal to a new arms race, for sure. And a lot of times it's state sponsored. So, and you know, a lot of days when we talk specifically about ransomware, but you know, we haven't even touched on the fact that ransomware today is oftentimes a secondary crime. You know, the amount of data that's walking out the door first with data exfiltration, ransomware is just the smoke screen, right? I mean, you know, Varonis, you know, Rubric, we're all in this space where we, you know, help identify the sensitive information that is your crown jewels before it gets stolen, right? Are you managing the risk around that proactively? So, you know, there's things that customers have to do before they even think about just, you know, technology for the ransomware side of the equation as well. There's technology to stack that helps them defense that entire end user piece of it. User behavior analytics, you know, things along those lines.
It's interesting, David, you know, you brought up data, and one of the most unique things about the panel, I think, is how many similarities you guys have in terms of backgrounds and actually experiences working with the same companies. And, you know, I know the name Varonis came up quite often, and, you know, because data is really the issue. And, you know, Steven, I'd love to get your perspective on that. And I know everybody speaks through the vein of Varonis because it seems like everybody on the panel has worked there at some point, but
I only competed with them.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, from a data perspective, I mean, to echo what David said, it's absolutely right. I mean, we talk about some of the same things, which is you need to understand what's the most important data to protect. You need to understand what data is exposed, because just plain and simple, that's what ransomware is after. And absolutely, because these days it's not just about encrypting it and asking for 5,000 in Bitcoin. Now it's they're encrypting it and also asking for ransom, but they're also exfiltrating the data, or they're encrypting it, exfiltrating the data, and then threatening to expose that information as a way to extract money out of it. And a lot of times, ransomware is actually the second, third, fourth, or fifth component of an attack, something like of attack coming in, where they're doing multiple things at once. So understanding where the most important is, where the crown jewels are, exactly that, and understanding where it's most exposed, understanding where you might have something like open access, where you have folders and files that are exposed to anyone within the organization. So that any account that clicks on that phishing link, as was mentioned before, I think my favorite phishing test that I was a little part of is when they sent me an email saying your expense report was denied. Pretty sure I clicked on that thing like 5 times. But I mean, they're getting more sophisticated. They're targeting users. They're looking at LinkedIn. They're looking at Facebook. They're looking at Instagram, and they're figuring out ways. Oh, they like puppies. I'm going to send them, click this picture for cute puppies. And so again, it's about knowing that level of impact, because when you have data that's open to anyone in the organization, all it takes is one to click on that link and that data's gone. So yeah, I guess that's my spiel about data. I think that's what you're looking for an answer.
I think just +1 on that, right? I have roots in data governance as well. And if you take a step back and think about the theme and the topic of ransomware, how effective is ransomware if it doesn't necessarily get to your crown jewel data? Like, it's bad. It's an eye opener, but it's not as impactful to the business as if it were, getting everything and everything in between. So yeah, working that strategy and data stewardship, data ownership into the mix is huge for how impactful ransomware can be.
Absolutely. And I know David mentioned zero trust, least privilege, right? And that's one of the big things people talk about. And it's almost like, just being a bystander in your own company, right? And you're not, how much access do you really need? I mean, to get your job done, limiting that access so that you protect the data and and people can't harm themselves. Thank you guys very much. And Gavin, I'd like to just propose the next question to you. What do you see as some of the biggest challenges we face in the market today? And not just in general, because quite frankly, we talked about SOAR, you brought that up. We talked about the power and capability. Well, there's a lot of challenges that come with that. And I'd be very interested in hearing what you have to say from working with numerous customers around implementing your platform and optimizing it properly.
Yeah, well, that's the big reason I came over here. So when I was exploring the marketplace and talking to a few of my CISO friends that I have in my network, you really need to find an agentless, cloud-based SOAR solution. And I got this telephone call from ServiceNow, and they were like, "Hey, we need someone to help run the SecOps business unit." And I'm like, "Oh, what's the offering?" Like, "Well, at the core, it's a SOAR platform offering." And I said, "All right, that's interesting." They said it's agentless. I said, "Oh, that's very interesting, and it's built in from the cloud and unlimited scalability." I said, "Well, that's even more interesting. That's exactly what I need." Because over the life cycle that I've spent in SecOps, which isn't as long as some of the other folks on this panel, but in the 13, 14 years that I've been doing it, there's been an explosion of technologies and different ways to address all these different problems. And the amount of noise that all of these security or just the security marketplace in general creates makes it very hard for practitioners to separate that signal from the noise. And this is very apparent if anybody's been at a hospital. So my wife, she's in healthcare, she's an NP, worked at a cardiac unit here in Boston. And I used to go and visit her when she was on the floor, and I'd walk on the floor as a newcomer, right, not being there every single day. And the bells would be going off and alarms are going and beeping, endless beeping, literally endless beeping. And I walk onto that floor and I'm like, "Oh man, how do you get your job done with all this noise? Like, this beeps, I look over here, that beeps, I look over here." And she just said to me, after a while, you don't even hear the beeping, you don't even hear the noise anymore. So that is literally the definition of alert fatigue, and that is something that has been plaguing the security industry for a very long time. So when I looked at the industry and the marketplace and I saw the offering that ServiceNow brought to that equation, I couldn't help ignore it. It's you know, if you look at the Verizon data breach reports, I forget what the number is now, but it's in the 22, 24, 25 million person labor shortage coming up over the next foreseeable future in the SecOps field alone. So we're not going to be able to tackle this with individual point product technologies alone. There needs to be almost a platform of platforms, if you will, for the security industry to aggregate all this data onto, so that end users can take the great data that they get from Rubrik and Arctic Wolf and Varonis, populate that into the Varonis system of record, and then make more intelligent business decisions on which threats and events they should be paying more attention to because of the potential business impact, not just because of the severity of the vulnerability of the incident itself, right? So bringing business context to the alert stream helps separate that signal from the noise, so you have less alert fatigue, so that you're able to actually be those SecOps practitioners that you were hired to be more responsive and proactive in going out there and, you know, not just protecting the crown jewels, but making sure there's anybody who's knocking on those doors that you're shutting them down. And that's very hard to do, and everybody on this panel knows that's hard to do. So my goal at ServiceNow is to really take all these amazing technologies, aggregate them onto a single platform so that organizations can make better, more timely decisions so that they're less impacted by the threats that we're trying to mitigate today. So that's, so what do I see as the biggest problem going forward? It's, you know, the dwell time of adversaries inside your environment is still 3 to 6 months. And then to get those adversaries out of your environment, it's still another 3 months. So Bob is literally living behind your couch for 9 months before you're able to evict him from your house. It's crazy, right? And we're all trying to solve this problem. And I think we're all in the boat and rowing in the same direction, but it's going to take a platform provider and a SOAR platform like ServiceNow to really bring the goodness and the greatness of all these solutions together so that we, again, can be more proactive in the security marketplace. At least that's kind of my take. So
I think it's a great take. And Gavin, you mentioned business perspective. I mean, what a challenge, right, for everybody in IT, right? It's, you know, we're trying to get our jobs done, but they don't get done without partnership with the business, right? It's all got to be done in that vein because we've all seen, you know, people who have dialed things down or up too much where it's interrupted the business. And if the business can't do what they need to do while we're still protecting it, then it's a failure. So appreciating that business, and I think by, you know, being able to sort of clean the plate with having orchestration and automation and tools like that, so you can focus on the real volume, which is, you know, what the business needs to get done, allows you to fulfill your job. Kevin, I would be very interested in your perspective, obviously coming from the MDR marketplace. You know, how do you think about the same topic?
Same deal, right? And it's the ability for us to convey, not from a technical perspective, hey, this is what we can do, but more along the lines of this is how fast we'll do it, and you won't suffer downtime from an alert or from, you know, alert fatigue. You know, as Gavin was going through it, I was thinking the same in my head was, you know, is IT staff working to keep the lights on, or are they working to improve the business function of the business? And so when you're dealing with a ton of applications, a ton of tools, a ton of noise, shelfware, projects, day in, day out requests, how are you dealing with, you know, your assets? How are you dealing with moving the business forward and improving your security posture overall? And so, Peter, back to your point is if we convey the value of being able to say, this is how we'll move the business forward from a vendor perspective, from a security posture perspective, long term, I think that does wonders for any organization, and it helps them improve their security posture and realize the value of partners like us and folks on this panel today.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Stephen, you know, we talk about, you know, we've spoken on this panel about a lot of solutions that help detect ransomware, but, you know, Varonis takes a very unique approach. I'd love to hear a bit more about that.
Sure. I mean, first and foremost, what I mentioned before about we do an assessment of risk, of understanding, you know, what data would potentially be exposed based on which account, or identify which accounts are service accounts, admin accounts, user accounts, et cetera, to go through and understand exactly what the impact would be if you get a ransomware infection. But one of the things that we do differently is by looking at patterns and behavior of the data. We understand what normal behavior is for a user, be it from when they're connecting in remotely to the VPN, from a home base here for me in Minneapolis, Minnesota, to what data that they access, to what websites and how they're interacting with Outlook and Exchange, to what data they're uploading or what websites they're communicating with, and all of that. And it gives us a unique perspective when it comes to something like ransomware. Yes, we can, of course, see known variants of ransomware. If a file starts getting renamed to a known extension of a known variant of ransomware, we'll be able to kick off an alert and feed it into systems such as Arctic Wolf or ServiceNow and allow those automated responses or kicking in that incident response process in place where you can come in and do that, including doing things like shut down the account. But also we look at this based on behavioral patterns. Since we know exactly how many files you're touching and interacting with on any particular time, if all of a sudden we see a user start to infect, or I shouldn't say infect, if we see them start to encrypt files, then it doesn't matter what strain or what type of ransomware variant it is. That is something that we're going to be able to recognize, that human beings can only do so many files at a time. So if they're doing what seems to be machine-based behavior, we can kick off an alert on that and kick in automated responses or tie in with our valuable partners that I already mentioned before. And so that's our way, a little bit of a unique way of us looking at that sort of behavior. And of course, it also, we're looking at what you're doing with the data afterwards. Are they exfiltrating it? Are they using techniques like DNS or just even flat out uploading it to a website? So we can understand where the data is flowing with that as well.
Thanks, Stephen. And David, it's interesting what Stephen brought up and the unique perspective they have on data. You guys also have a very unique perspective on data, and love to hear about how you describe that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, Rubric, most people think of us as, backup modernization platform, but really it's just it's our Trojan horse. You want to look at it. It's how we get data under management. Really, at the end of the day, we're a data management platform. And, when you have this concept of metadata that you could collectively analyze and understand, much of what Varonis is doing, we have some of those extension values as well, right? We can see the entire totality of all data from the point of a backup, so there's no impact to production, to analyze that for data sensitivity, for content awareness. We also look at, the heuristics around, things that happen in a file system layer that happen when there's types of signatures of a ransomware event or, suspect activity. And as you think about it from the user persona perspective, when you bring the user behavior analytics that we do into the equation, then they can cross correlate that together. I really think of it as the kind of the triangle of truth. We have people, content, and activities, but over time, and with that relevance of view, you can take and really pivot and answer a lot of different questions. And then on top of that, we feed it into essentially a machine learning powered platform we call Polaris that gives us the ability to kind of have that next generational self-learning, self-tuning model that's going to give us those insights, so that this doesn't have to be reactive from a human analyzing it, and cuts down the alert fatigue, right? And when we do identify something, we kick it off. We do what we do really well, resiliency, recovery, and then we pass it off to our SOAR platform partners for invoking the rest of the response from the security ecosystem around us. And we kind of take that view that the API economy we build our platform on is the way to expand and really harness the value of data management platform in the greater security ecosystem for protecting customers for today.
Thank you, David. So the next discussion I want to have, this is always a painful one for me when clients call you, they're under a ransomware attack, or ransomware has hit their systems, and the conversation of to pay or not to pay. Right? I think we've all been on the other side of that line. And it's like, you pay, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. Right? And Gavin, I see you nodding over there as well. I mean, what's your thoughts on that? How are you sort of advising?
I'm nodding because I'm laughing inside, because there was an article recently where an organization paid to get their information back from a ransomware campaign, but actually didn't put any of the mitigation controls in place to stop that from happening again. And they came back and took them down again, and they had to pay twice. I mean, you can't make that up. That's real. That's happening. So it kind of brings you back to that the question you asked earlier. It's like, is it the people or is it the technology? And in that situation, I can't help but think it's the people, because they never even put the technology in place to help mitigate that in the first place. So, so that was my piece. I was, but it made me think of that,
Yeah.
Ransomware, it's not, yeah, that's what I was nodding and laughing about. Was
Yeah, no, it's
on the story.
and that's why I brought it up, because we're all probably thinking in our heads of how many times we've heard, I mean, for companies or even individuals, right, who go through this and they end up having to pay, and it's like, what are you doing when you're in that desperate situation and you want your data?
Yeah, right. Depending on
It's
what
like
they
we don't
have, what
negotiate
they
with
got a hold of.
terrorists, right?
Yeah, we don't negotiate with terrorists. They had to take something real good for me to pay personally, right? And there's not that much out there that I'd be willing to pay to get back anyway. So yeah, it's you have to at least try to you have to do at least the bare minimum. So when I see these stories and these articles about organizations that are still not even doing the bare minimum, it's like, what are you doing? Like, cybersecurity is a board of directors topic. It's been that way for a number of years now. IT spend is up when it comes to cybersecurity. It's no longer this, nice to have, or yeah, we're going to get to that project. Those days are over. So, organizations need to get into that mindset that they need to invest more time and resources in getting ahead of this problem, not just ransomware, but security, incidents and events in general. Or again, they're never going to, they're never going to be able to stem this tide. It'll just continue to creep up on them. So yeah, pay or not to pay, you better have something really, really important.
I mean, it's different for every customer, right? I mean, I'm on the service response team, so. And, we get involved with these conversations with customers, and it really comes down to, is it data can they afford to lose if they didn't have it backed up, protect? What's the impact of the business? Is it going to put them out of business? I mean, the FBI will tell them they can't. The FBI won't tell them to pay, but they'll say, you got to make a business decision around it, and obviously, if you're in that situation, anybody listening to this call, and you're in that situation, obviously call your insurance company. If you have cyber risk insurance, they'll bring in professional negotiators, and it's a business on both sides of the equation. I mean, these crime syndicates, they know whether or not they negotiate, and they know exactly how much they can get them for in a premium, how much they can get them for in a discount, and it's a cost of doing business, and they'll let the professional negotiator come in and do that. But it is kind of tongue in cheek, don't negotiate with the terrorists. But at the end of the day, we have to look at the business value impact to your business.
Stephen, I see you nodding over there. What are your thoughts?
I mean, I'm completely agreement with the first two folks. I mean, it is such a case by case basis, and yeah, you do everything you can to try to assess your risk, figure out what the impact is going to be. Try to figure out, did they actually get anything out of the environment? If they unencrypt it, does that mean that other data could still potentially be exposed? I mean, and of course, make sure if you do have something like that happen, as was mentioned, you better make sure that you doesn't happen again. But yeah, I mean, there's no hard and fast rule for that. That's for sure.
Yeah, I agree. Evan, any thoughts from your side?
Yeah, guys, call me crazy, but I think I'm skeptical when it comes to the attackers of crypto lockers and ransomwares, right? So, yeah, I think it comes down to the idea of assessing your risk, right? We laugh about it, we joke about it, but it's a real thing. And when you assess your risk, let's take healthcare for example, if those files are under or encrypted, you got to balance that out, right? But overall, I think one, even if you do cough up, there's really no guarantee that all your files will be decrypted in the first place, right? Yeah, especially if it's a very small amount. You set yourself up as a target to secondary. So, my initial stance is whenever absolute possible, a risk assessed aside, never pay the ransom, right? So.
Well, just one last thought, and then I'll close things out. But I think the issue of risk and ownership, it brings me back to 2010, right, when the financial crisis, and everything started to change, and now people in security are starting to talk about fiduciary responsibilities, and there's real ownership and responsibility on this. So I just want to say, thank you all for joining. You guys, it's been a pleasure speaking with each of you. I think each of your disciplines bring a lot of value to this discussion, and I hope the entire audience feels better informed from what we've spoken about today. And I know from here, we are moving on to a tech showcase and fireside chat with Dell and Commvault. So I hope you enjoy that next. And just once again, to everybody on the panel, I really appreciate your time, your perspective, and I hope the audience will follow up with each of you individually to learn more about what you can bring to ransomware. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, Peter.